It's a strange thing to be told you're stable. In medicine, that word usually means success. It means the immediate danger is past. But for people with primary adrenal insufficiency or Addison's disease, stable can feel like a gaslight. You look at the labs and the numbers are right where they should be. You're taking the medication that keeps you alive, and yet you wake up tired. You feel this flatness, a lack of drive that feels almost physical. And the hardest part, you start wondering if it's just you, if maybe you're just getting lazy, or if you're imagining it. But today we're looking at an article from My Adrenal Life that suggests you aren't imagining anything. It argues that modern medicine is really good at keeping adrenal patients alive, but it might be missing the pieces that make them feel alive.
That distinction between surviving and thriving is exactly where the science of endocrinology gets messy. We tend to think of hormone replacement like changing a battery. If the battery is dead, you put in a new one and the device works perfectly again. But the human adrenal gland isn't a single battery. It's more like a complex chemical factory.
Right, and the standard treatment for Addison's is basically two hormones, cortisol and aldosterone. We replace those and we say, job done.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, that job done is miraculous. Before the 1950s, Addison's was fatal. Replacing cortisol and aldosterone is what keeps patients breathing and keeps their hearts beating. But the adrenal glands produce more than just those two things. When you lose the adrenal cortex, which is the outer shell of the gland, you aren't just losing cortisol. You're losing an entire suite of hormones and interactions that we simply don't replace in standard therapy. And that gap, that missing slice of physiology, is where the symptoms of fatigue, brain fog, and emotional flattening tend to live.
So let's break down exactly what's missing. The article highlights two main areas, adrenal androgens, specifically DHEA, and then this really fascinating interaction with adrenaline. Let's start with DHEA. I feel like I see DHEA supplements at the grocery store next to vitamin C. It has this reputation as a vague anti-aging thing, but biologically, what is it doing?
It's actually the most abundant steroid hormone in the human body, which surprises people. DHEA is an androgen, a precursor hormone. The adrenal glands churn it out, and then tissues throughout the body convert it into more potent sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Now, for men, losing adrenal DHEA isn't usually a crisis because they have testes that produce plenty of testosterone. But for women, the story is very different.
Because women don't have that backup generator for androgen.
Precisely. Women rely on the adrenals for a significant portion of their androgen supply. When you have primary adrenal insufficiency, your DHEA levels drop to almost zero. And since standard treatment only replaces cortisol, you are left with a profound androgen deficiency. The clinical picture of that isn't usually life-threatening. You won't die from low DHEA, but it affects the texture of your life. We're talking about libido, sure, but also mood, the ability to build muscle, and just general energy levels.
The texture of life. That's a good phrase for it. Because the article mentions that women often report this loss of spark. It's not that they can't function, but the drive is gone. Is there actual data backing this up, or is it mostly anecdotal?
There is data, but it's contentious. There was a landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Arlt and colleagues back in '99. They gave DHEA replacement to women with adrenal insufficiency, and the results were striking. The women reported improved mood, better libido, and just a greater sense of well-being. It seemed like a slam dunk.
But if it was a slam dunk in 1999, why isn't every Addison's patient on DHEA today?
Because subsequent studies were messier. Some replicated those benefits, but others didn't show a statistically significant difference compared to placebo. It turns out that measuring well-being is incredibly difficult. Plus, DHEA can have side effects like acne or hair growth, which some patients dislike. So the Endocrine Society guidelines currently suggest it as an option, something to try if a patient has low libido or low energy despite good cortisol management, but it's not a mandatory part of the standard kit. It's left in this gray area.
Which leaves the patient in a gray area. They have to advocate for it, or they might not even know it's an option. But I want to pivot to the second missing piece the article discusses, because this one blew my mind.
The connection between cortisol and adrenaline, I always assumed adrenaline was separate, part of the nervous system, fight or flight, totally distinct from the cortisol issues.
This is one of the most elegant and overlooked pieces of human anatomy. So picture the adrenal gland. It has two parts, the outer rind, which is the cortex, and the inner core, the medulla. The cortex makes cortisol. The medulla makes epinephrine, or adrenaline. Now, blood flows through the adrenal gland in a very specific direction from the outside in.
Okay, so the blood washes over the cortisol-making cells first, then flows into the center where the adrenaline is made.
Exactly. This is called the intra-adrenal portal system. It means that the cells in the center, the ones making adrenaline, are normally bathed in incredibly high concentrations of cortisol. We are talking concentrations 100 times higher than what you'd find in the rest of your bloodstream. And this is crucial because the enzyme that creates adrenaline, it's called PNMT, it requires that massive cortisol bath to function efficiently.
I see where you're going. If you have Addison's, your cortex is destroyed, no cortisol is being made in that outer rind, so the inner core never gets that high concentration bath.
Right. Even if you take a hydrocortisone pill, you're just raising the levels in your general bloodstream. You can never replicate that super concentrated local environment inside the gland. So while patients with Addison's can still make some adrenaline because the nerve signals are still there, the synthesis is impaired. The machinery is rusty.
So practically speaking, what does that feel like? If my adrenaline machinery is rusty and I get cut off in traffic or I have a deadline looming, what happens?
You might feel a delay response or a feeling of being easily overwhelmed. Research has shown that in moments of acute stress, like hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, the epinephrine response in Addison's patients is significantly blunted. It's like stepping on the gas pedal and getting a hesitation before the engine revs. Patients often describe this as a lack of resilience. Minor stressors that used to be manageable suddenly feel like mountains because that sharp, immediate chemical assist isn't firing at 100%.
That aligns so perfectly with the emotional flatness or dimmed feeling the article describes. It's not just about being tired, it's about a lack of dynamic range. The highs aren't as high, the reaction time isn't as sharp.
And that is difficult to explain to an employer or a family member. You look fine, your potassium levels are fine, but physiologically, your stress response system is operating with one hand behind its back. You're missing the fine-tuning.
This brings us back to the psychological toll. The article mentions that patients often ask, is it just me? Or they feel guilty for not bouncing back. If you don't understand the physiology we just discussed, the DHEA gap, the epinephrine gap, you interpret those symptoms as character flaws.
That is the tragedy of invisible illness. When the medical definition of recovery is just not dying, anything short of feeling amazing gets internalized as a personal failure. But when you look at the quality of life data, and there are surveys from the NIDDK and European registries confirming this, people with adrenal insufficiency consistently score lower on vitality and social functioning than the general population, even when their treatment is technically perfect.
So if I'm listening to this and I have Addison's, or I love someone who does, what is the actionable takeaway here? We can't fix the intra-adrenal portal system. We can't surgically reconstruct the cortisol flow. Is the answer just accept it?
Acceptance is part of it, but it's about informed acceptance, not resignation. First, regarding DHEA, it is worth a conversation with your endocrinologist. If you are a woman struggling with low libido, dry skin, or just zero drive, asking for a trial of DHEA is a reasonable medical request. It doesn't work for everyone, but for some, it brings the lights back on.
And for the adrenaline issue, since we can't replace that delivery mechanism.
That's where lifestyle modification stops being just generic advice and becomes a medical necessity. If your body's chemical response to stress is blunted, you have to manually manage your stress inputs. It means recognizing that you don't have the same buffer as everyone else. It validates the need for pacing, for physical recovery time after emotional stress. It's not laziness, it's manual regulation of a system that is supposed to be automatic.
It reframes self-care from a luxury to a prosthetic. You are doing the work your adrenal medulla used to do.
That's a beautiful way to put it. You are manually operating the machinery. And I think simply knowing why, knowing that the epinephrine synthesis is impaired, can dissolve so much shame. You aren't imagining the brain fog. You aren't weak for feeling overwhelmed by a loud noise or a sudden conflict. Your chemistry is different.
It's interesting, looking at the history of this, we spent the last 70 years mastering the survival part of Addison's. Hydrocortisone is a miracle drug, but it feels like we're entering a new era where we have to look at the nuance.
We are. The goalpost is moving. It's no longer enough to just keep patients out of adrenal crisis. The goal now is full restoration of function, or as close as we can get. We're seeing research into circadian rhythm release, pumps that release cortisol in pulses like the body does, and more serious consideration of combination therapies like DHEA. We are slowly moving from staying alive to living well.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more thing the article mentioned, the quieter spark. It's such a haunting phrase. It implies that the person is still there, but the volume is turned down. For the people around them, partners, parents, what should they be looking for?
They should look for the gap between intent and action. Often people with AI want to do things, the desire is there, but the physiological bridge to get from the couch to the car or from the thought to the action is broken or requires 10 times more effort to cross. If you see that struggle, don't read it as disinterest. Read it as a fuel shortage. The car has gas, cortisol, but the spark plugs, DHEA and adrenaline, aren't firing right.
And asking what can I do is helpful, but understanding that the answer might just be patient with my pace is probably better.
Absolutely. And validating their reality. If they say they feel off despite normal labs, believe them. The labs measure blood volume of cortisol. They don't measure neurosteroid levels in the brain or epinephrine synthesis in the medulla. The patient's experience is a piece of data that the lab test is missing.
That's the big takeaway for me. The map is not the territory. The lab report is not the patient. We have these amazing medical tools, but the human body's complexity, especially something as intricate as the adrenal cortex-medulla interaction, is still a few steps ahead of our ability to replicate it in a pill.
It is. But every time we talk about these missing hormones, we push the understanding forward. We validate the patient who has been silently struggling for years, thinking they were just losing their edge.
If you know someone navigating the complexities of adrenal insufficiency, or if this conversation helped you understand your own body a little bit better, pass this episode along. Sometimes the most powerful treatment is just knowing you aren't crazy.